Welcome back to the Tech Flow Futures stage here at BVE 2019. I've been involved in content rights management for many years now, software systems and rights contracts and the like, and there's no doubt that for all organizations who own and control and license content, it's getting more and more complex in a digital world. And we're starting to see signs of a model that's more transparent, where the owners of the content, the creatives, have more control and can manage their own intellectual property. And that's where new blockchain and smart contracts technology that enables that can come into play. And one of the enablers is Dell Technologies' blockchain solution. So we're going to hear in the next session how that enables media and entertainment organizations to increase the level of trust and transparency among all the players in the content value chain, as well as reducing a lot of the inefficiencies and the manual processes and the overhead that goes along with managing content rights. Really pleased to welcome to the TechFlow Future stage Nkiru Uwaje, who is the blockchain strategy lead for Dell EMC. She's going to take us through the vision that Dell has for the future of content rights. As you listen to Nkiru's presentation, please do share on social media. Follow the event on Twitter at BVE, at BVE Expo, and the hashtag for your tweets is hashtag BVE19. So please do that. And also, if you have questions, and this is such an important and growing area, you may well have questions. The roving mic will be available towards the end of the 30 minutes. So Nkiru, over to you.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nkiru Uwaje, and the blockchain strategy lead for Dell Tech. So today I want to discuss with you a little bit about the future of digital rights management and what role blockchain can play in it. So just a kind of temperature check in the room. How many of you are working on blockchain or are potentially exploring blockchain technology in your field? Great. So I see a couple of you are definitely right up there. So why are we discussing the future of digital rights management? So before we kind of leap into it and what blockchain can do in this space, I want to tell you a short story. So in 1997, a South African by the name of Stephen Sugarman went on a quest for his favorite American folk artist that was very prominent in the 70s. Now, Sixto Rodriguez was pretty much active in the 70s, bringing out 2 albums, and then suddenly vanished in the US. However, in South Africa, lo and behold, for decades, he was so famous, and everybody thought him to be dead. So, Stephen set out on this mission to really find out whatever happened to Sixto Rodriguez, and why did South Africa never hear another great album. So finally, after a year of actually searching the US, turns out they actually did find Sixto. And guess what? He was alive and kicking in Detroit, working in construction. It turns out that the tapes and the albums that Sixto had recorded were somehow transported to South Africa and made copies of, distributed. However, none of those royalties, nor that fame, actually had been communicated back to Sixto over in the US. So for decades, he thought he was this musician who had had zero, basically, impact up until he was found again. So a real rise to fame meant that actually in 1997 and afterwards, he then managed to get that second hit where he was touring the US, South Africa, and even went to Glastonbury at the age of like 69. Right? Great success story, except one little problem, which is basically fast forward into 2014, and actually he gets taken into a legal custody battle about the only content he's actually even produced. So here Sixto is having to fight a battle that in the 70s he produced music, and the record label took basically those royalties and owned them, and he still didn't see any royalty payouts. Now, fast forward, obviously, into this day and age, we still have a lot of content issues in terms of actually getting payouts in terms of royalties as content creators. So my question is, do we really own the content that we create? And if we do, why are we still seeing this problem in terms of royalty payouts? So if we think a little bit in terms of what's happening at the moment within this space, is that actually 25% of the royalties are still being left unpaid due to lack of being able to actually identify who owns that content. And that's not to say the singular person who owns content, but actually in terms of the multiple owners who create, for example, songs, who create maybe films, etc., and that the majority of people who contribute to that content actually are left unpaid. Now, as a content creator, you can imagine that's not necessarily great, especially when you see numbers like this in millions and millions of dollars up there annually that are actually not being paid out. So where does the money go? And who actually owns that content? When we look at the current challenges in terms of how the entire ecosystem is distributed, you have at the very top the content creators, whether that's composers, photographers, actual recording artists, musicians, or writers. That then eventually gets boiled down to major labels, music publishers, administration companies, aggregators, content platforms. These then package it up, right, market it out, and actually look for sources in terms of service providers who can then basically distribute that either to consumers or actually to festivals, etc. That whole chain goes back into the ecosystem and distributes, in that sense, the royalties. However, along the chain, certain people basically get left out of a piece of the pie. And that's especially when you see, for example, in terms of a band, how many drummers are paid on the recording music that's been put out by artists. So you're seeing more and more of these challenges arise, and even though that they're existing digital rights management content, they're still highly centralized, and they're still highly centralized in this framework, which poses the problem. Now, let us ask a different question. How can technology enable us to think differently about our business models? And how can technology, especially such as decentralized platforms like blockchain, actually enable us to drive more trust and transparency within this ecosystem? At Dell Technologies, we believe that blockchain actually enables us to drive that trust and transparency. And the use cases that we see having the most impact and potential within this industry are really around digital rights management, royalty systems, enabling actually fighting piracy, fair trade for talent, micropayments for artists. So these are really some of the use cases that we see quite prominent. Now your question might be, how? Because surely the problems are quite large and pertain to an entire industry. Now, by no means are we saying that blockchain is that magic pill that you're going to have and everything changes. But what we're saying is that actually it represents a different type of logic that enables you to think a little bit differently. Now, in order to explain how blockchain can actually transform that, I'm going to walk you through a simple scenario which is pertaining to digital rights management and ownership. If we start right at the beginning in terms of content creation, think about a new future. Think about a future as a content creator, you basically easily through an application or platform upload your content. It might be a photograph, it might be a piece of music, it might be written content. You then upload this into a smart contract that's actually legally binding, and you put in basically in terms of what percentage you own of that content, right? It might be a piece of music, it might be that specific photograph. You then have that real-time contract that's then being placed out into the blockchain network. Now, blockchain in a nutshell is a decentralized digital ledger that basically gives everybody an equal copy of everything that has been created. Meaning that once you've uploaded this smart contract and its content into the blockchain network, it is now being registered across every single participant on this. After that, if it's then uploaded into this database, this is where the combination of different type of technologies is really important. You then basically embed a digital watermark on top. What does it look like? Imagine a serial number, but digital, for content. Great. So now you finally have your contract, you have your digital identity linked to your content and your contract, and on top of that, you basically have the relevant copyrights all registered back into that, all in a single database that's ready to go down for distribution. Now, imagine any type of content distribution, still the same things that you consume today, doing exactly what they're doing today, but connected to this blockchain ecosystem. You now have that real-time contract management that's actually being reiterated into that distribution system. It's being monitored, enabling actually real-time checking as to what's happening with that content, who's downloading it, is it someone in South Africa, is it somebody in the UK, and then actually putting that back into the system and saying, we have now recorded basically that this song has been streamed 10,000 times somewhere in London. More importantly, that auditing and reporting feature, that keeps on going back into the system and time-stamping when what has happened. Meaning you have, again, that real-time end-to-end cycle of recording content, distribution, and consumption. And this is the part that I think all content creators should care about and what makes me excited about this platform. You finally come to the royalty payouts. Since the entire ecosystem from start to finish is linked to this smart contract, and we'll talk a little bit more about how smart contracts are set up, is linked back into the system, it means that if you were able to actually have those royalties paid out, you can now actually have that from a micro perspective. You can actually link it back into what's been stipulated in the smart contract. Inkuru owns the rights to this photograph, and therefore, if that photograph is being consumed through this distribution and content management system, then I, as a creator, should be able to get paid out from this. The question is, do I really need any other platform except this, or any type of record label or distribution arm in the middle? Cutting out those intermediaries means that content creators get a far bigger share, actually, of the content that they own, which is obviously what a lot of content creators are quite excited about. Now, you might ask, that's all well and nice, but ultimately, what is this smart contract and why is it relevant for blockchain? So if I want to say one thing is that there's a lot of hype around blockchain and a lot of confusion around blockchain. But what makes blockchain really exciting and really important within the digital rights management ecosystem is this. If you think about traditional contracts, what happens? Especially as a content creator, you might get something digitally sent to you, then they ask you, please print it out, sign your signature, scan it back in, somebody puts it in some database, nobody really knows what's in the contract, etc. So that's pretty much what we know a contract, right? We all don't like them, we all probably don't read them, and we tend to click accept, etc. because they don't really do anything in the background. So blockchain kind of says, you know what, if we look at automation and we look at trust, traditional contracts have not served us very well. Now, let me introduce the smart contract. Imagine a smart contract where every single word behind it is actually code, algorithms. That means there are rules to it. It means that even Inkuru in her contract says, for every time my song is played, I get X amount of royalties paid out according to this copyright law. Therefore, this will happen automatically. It also means that if you all are part of this same production and you're all listed in this smart contract, it means every single one of us gets paid out this specific piece of the pie. Now, so big fans of smart contracts, and we're seeing this across all industries, not only media and entertainment, but also think about insurance policies, think about finances, think about buying the deed to a house. So these smart contracts can heavily automate processes, but more importantly, because of transparency of the information into it and the automation at the back end, it actually ensures that we can trust the contracts that we put out there. And that's why they matter a lot for digital rights management. What type of information could you actually store within this? So if you think about some of the minimum data requirements that you put into the cycle that we initially saw, you could have, for example, the ownership information, publishing information, usage rights, what type of lyrics or images are according to that, watermarks, payment information. This is everything that basically the algorithm behind the smart contract can execute on. And that's really where kind of the key potential of the blockchain platform lies. Now you might say, you know what, that's all great, but isn't all this emerging technology just a little bit future thinking? Well, maybe, but maybe not. We're seeing major artists actually band together in order to drive that industry change. Content creators who truly believe in the power of this technology and actually investing into it. This fall, actually, coming to you, is an entire festival that's going to be basically managed by blockchain. So you have a couple big artists there, DJs there, who are saying that ultimately festivals are great, but usually there's a lot of people involved who don't necessarily see a lot of benefit in terms of payouts on that. So why not use blockchain as a logic and the smart contract logic to actually enable ticket sales that are actually based exactly on that logic? More so, we see some other prominent people in industry, like Pitbull, actually saying, you know what? Technology is great, and blockchain, more importantly, can be revolutionary for our industry. So blockchain, Pitbull has actually put together a hackathon called Smackathon, very catchy, that focuses on basically investing VC dollars in order to figure out how to solve some of the problems within music through blockchain. So already we're seeing also huge organizations such as Sony and also with Xbox looking at digital rights management and focusing on how can we actually drive a better consumer engagement for the platforms we have, but more importantly, how can we actually increase the trust and transparency that we have? So I think it's a great time for the industry, and this is why Dell Technologies has actually invested a lot of R&D in the last 2 years, specifically around blockchain, in order to help content creators, but also big organizations who are working in entertainment and media to really visualize some of the change and actually monetize that as well. So we focused on really bringing together from our kind of 7 strategically aligned companies a managed blockchain platform that can help you to actually enable your global business by focusing on building portfolio solutions that actually matter to this industry and solve industry problems. And that can also drive a massive business outcome. So for example, in terms of cost reduction, in terms of revenue growth. So some of the capabilities we've built on top of our platforms are focusing on digital rights management, on identity wallets, micropayments, real-time transactions, actually enabling you to reduce some of the piracy in terms of prevention through advanced security methods. So these are all things that we focused on with our clients and brought that to market. So anybody who is interested in talking a little bit more about who and how we've helped our customers, please reach out to us. We're just on the stand there to your left. And we're working with our industry partners such as Deloitte, WWT, Wipro, and Consensus actually to bring this to life. So that's in a nutshell as to in terms of how blockchain can enable the future of digital rights management. And anybody who wants to ask some questions, do let me know. I'm sure some of that might be a little bit interesting. So please let me know or catch us at our stand. Thank you very much. It might not be on.
Hello. What are your thoughts on tokenization? Tokenization.
Yeah.
Any thoughts within the rights management? Is it necessary as part of the future of rights management? Can it be done without tokenization?
Yeah, I think tokenization definitely has a role within not only rights management, but I think in the wider ecosystem, right? One, you can tokenize pretty much any asset that's out there. Usually you see it more in physical assets because you need a way to basically quantify or digitize that asset. But I think you could do the same for content, right? If there's a way that you potentially want to trade more on tokens rather than the asset itself, you could do that. That could be interesting for aggregators and distributors. So it's definitely a play we're seeing, but probably more in physical assets.
Yeah, so I would like to know a little bit more about how you see this helping preventing piracy, because the way I see it, you have very, very strong encryption already today. This is not increasing the encryption. People are still pirating. If you cut out the middleman, you don't have those very powerful, rich organizations actually pursuing lawsuits and all that. I, for one, as a content creator, would hate to go and sue a bunch of people for pirating products. If you cut out that middleman, wouldn't that actually promote people from pirating?
So I think it's not necessarily cutting out the middleman. It's more a little bit about what role does that middleman play. And the philosophy of blockchain is, right, the problem that we have at the moment is that we have one central kind of source in terms of where that's distributed, meaning that it's far easier, if you look at some of the cases in the last couple of years, to actually hack those specific companies or organizations where they rely on that single database. However, if you think about blockchain, right, in itself, first of all, you have to go through massive amounts of encryption, but more importantly, every single participant / node of that network has a copy of it. Well, I'd be interested to see who can hack 1,000 nodes at the same time, right? That's going to be far more complicated, but it also means that you can save your content in a different way. Now, the second point on piracy, right? Again, if you have more of a distributed network that actually focuses on encryption and additional privacy, but also watermarking that in terms of digital content, it makes it far less likely that that content can just be illegally downloaded and distributed. Because ultimately, you basically have a serial number that will be hashed at the back that you can crack, because that can only be cracked by the identity code and the key that's been distributed and released through basically payments. Does that answer your question a little bit more?
You have that technology already today, and the pirating very often happens at where people rent something legally and then pirate it out there. The blockchain doesn't prevent that. That just keeps track on the entire chain.
Yes, of course. But I think when you're talking about something that happens already at the start of something, right, we cannot prevent how humans act. But what we can do at something that's quite prominent online, because there's a lot of content that's being, pirated, that's actually actively online, just readily available. You can, for example, prevent someone from going to the cinema and recording a really terrible copy of it and then selling it somewhere in Ghana. However, you can pretty much reduce the kind of content that's currently being released without kind of legal boundaries or ownership validation online.
Hi.
Hi.
Great talk.
Thanks.
So these solutions are built on top of Ethereum, correct?
A little bit about our platform, right? So basically, our VMware blockchain is pretty much an abstraction layer of the Ethereum virtual machine. However, what we've done is actually embed our own consensus engine that's based on a voting algorithm, so that actually scales, because that's one of the problems we're seeing across the industry. So happy to talk to you through some comparative numbers, but where Ethereum would do like 23 transactions, our consensus engine would do like 444. It also means that the CPU usage is less by probably 30%. And then on top of that, basically, we've said, listen, we don't want to stipulate that you need to work on Ethereum, or we don't want to stipulate that you need to be based on one single cloud. So we've orchestrated a multi-cloud environment. And then on top of that, on our roadmap is that you can run any type of smart contract on top of it, whether it's chain code or basically the Ethereum layer. So that wouldn't matter. And on top of that, I don't know if any of you saw our Boomi talk earlier today, But we're saying that, fine, even if you have one layer that needs to talk to another type of blockchain or another type of smart contract, you could actually use BVE connectors, which were released last year for Ethereum and Hyperledger, to basically signal back and have that data simplification and management layer.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Hi. So are you working with any like Hollywood studios or broadcasters or OTT streaming companies? Any projects that you're involved in?
Yes, we are. They're on a very tight NDA. We're taking that privacy layer to the next level. No, but yes, so we are working with very big media and entertainment companies that we all know and love. And it's all very much focused on digital rights management, but also actually payment reconciliation.
Hi there. So I'm kind of actively working with all the traditional style contracts, and one of the challenges we've got is the changing and evolving definitions of media rights. How, in terms of getting the legal teams on board with that kind of thing, someone else may have an answer for it, but what's been the biggest blockers? What's helped you proceed in kind of managing that challenge within digital rights management? It's certainly key for us in the TV industry.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? And I think it points out exactly what we need to consider, right? Is that technology can do one thing, but the human intervention still needs to all be aligned and streamlined in that logic. So actually, we are working with quite a few international law firms exactly on that, because they're seeing that smart contract piece is really important, but in order to actually execute it, you have to have similar language, you have to have similar definitions. And where we see the power is saying, listen, this emerging technology space enables us to actually come together and collaborate. So, in terms of consortiums, we're seeing basically legal firms work with other industry leaders coming together in order to re-establish that definition and drive more synergy. Great. And I think we have like 2 minutes left, or 3. So maybe last question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Osmin Callis, and I'm the Business Development Manager at nChain. I'm wondering, in terms of the fact that it's an open blockchain, I'm assuming it's an open blockchain solution?
Actually, Dell Technologies focuses on permission blockchain for the enterprise.
Fine, okay. So, as a permission blockchain, how do you find, sort of looking out 10, 20, 30 years into the future, the fact that the data which is immutable, which belongs to individuals potentially and corporations, assuming obviously that your encryption algorithms stay as robust as they are today, eventually the one thing that we often have to consider is the fact that with the data being immutable, you have to be very, very careful what data you actually choose to write to the blockchain. So what's driven your sort of decisions behind your choices about what you actually write to the blockchain, what you choose to sort of keep off-chain, and how you sort of balance that with the fact that eventually there is a possibility of compromise in 20, 30, 40 years' time?
Really important question, and I love the insights on that. I think that's for me the exciting part of working in a company that has 7 different actually entities under it and having different capabilities. One big piece, and tomorrow there's actually going to be a presentation by one of my colleagues on basically kind of the off-chain storage piece, right? So where we see that role is that a lot of big organizations are going to have this problem and that concern from a regulatory perspective. So our logic is to, well, first of all, on-chain storage is pretty expensive anyway, so why would you want to really go that route? But 2, there's a massive concern around data protection and digital identity, etc., especially with GDPR being far more prominent, at the moment. So the logic is basically that instead of storing the actual data on-chain, you basically store a hash of it. So that hash would actually also enable you to basically delete the actual raw data if you needed to, instead of actually just storing everything and being open online. And that's obviously still subject to some sort of privacy issues. So that's where we're seeing it, and really focusing on R&D dollars in terms of investing into that. Thank you. Hey, thank you so much, everyone.